In this vlog, I'd like to take a look at the Dust Bowl. And you ask, why do you want to look at the Dust Bowl in a series about sunlight and climate? Before I answer that question, let's make sure everybody knows what the Dust Bowl was. So in the 1930s, these horrible storms originated in the central United States. They were large and black, and they made it impossible to see and difficult to breathe. They wreaked havoc on machinery, and they coated pastures and crops with the soil that made it impossible for the plants to live. They were so massive, they actually reached the East Coast. So the point I want you to consider is that they were existential for the people in the central United States. They couldn't live in those conditions, and many left. Global climate change is gradually going to become existential. It's going to change where people can live. But during the Dust Bowl, actions were taken that solved the problem, which is what we need to do with global climate change. Let's look at the history to see how people came together to tackle an existential problem with climate. Turns out that written records exist saying there were severe dust storms on the southern Great Plains dating back to the 1830s, which was before intensive plowing took place. So the area was on the edge of producing large dust storms before man interfered by creating vast areas of bare soil after plowing. And what became known as the Dust Bowl struck in 1930. In the same year, drought struck the Midwest and the southern United States. In 1931, crops started to fail, and the first major storms came through, and they were dubbed black blizzards. In 1932, the U.S. Weather Bureau reported 14 major dust storms. In 1933, 38 storms. They started to happen pretty frequently, every few days. Also, the Civilian Conservation Corps was established by President Roosevelt in March, and the idea was to solve a lot of the wind velocity problems by growing trees. Look at the date, 2 years into the crisis, and the government is already taking action. Here's a photo of these trees being planted. Look, there's no machines. This is hard physical labor. An area as vast as the Great Plains, they didn't throw their hands up in the air and say, "Oh, this is just too huge. We can't deal with this." No, they got into it. They did the work that needed to be done. In 1934, the drought spread throughout 75% of the country. Perhaps the dust was actually affecting the climate for an entire continent. Anyway, the dust storms carried topsoil as far east as New York and Chicago. The Taylor Grazing Act was launched to manage public lands by halting overgrazing and soil deterioration on federal public lands by establishing regulated grazing districts, permits, and fees. Remember, this was the West, where people were used to lack of federal regulation and oversight. All of a sudden, there were districts established, permits required in order to use the lands, and fees that had to be paid. A huge change. Black Sunday happened on April 14th, 1935. It was known as the most severe dust storm of the entire crisis. On the government side, the Soil Conservation Service was established to focus on aiding farmers with soil-saving practices to combat soil erosion. In 1936, there were 68 reported dust storms. The government began paying farmers to adopt soil conservation techniques. In 1937, a record high 72 dust storms occurred. The Shelter Belt Project began planting trees to break the wind. So it did take a few years for boots to hit the ground for that Shelter Belt project. In 1938, the soil conservation efforts technically dropped the soil loss by 65%, which was a big win, but there were still 61 storms. In 1939, the drought finally ended. Hallelujah. And agricultural practices continued to improve. What were the practices that helped end the Dust Bowl? Massive tree planting and revised farming practices, such as plowing and planting in curves across slopes, rotating crops, planting cover crops when a harvested or plowed field would be fallow. What were the after effects? There were great human costs. Thousands of people suffered from dust pneumonia, and more than 1 million people, often called Okies, left the Great Plains, with many moving to California. A significant portion of this topsoil was lost forever. Also, government actions took place that were significant. The federal government bought millions of acres of ruined farmland and established soil conservation programs on these acres. Also, government agencies learned the importance of education and incentives. Thousands of farmers learned the benefits of personal conservation actions, both to their neighbors and to themselves. Many of these practices are ingrained in the way farmers farm. Now that we've looked at the history of the Dust Bowl, we can compare the Dust Bowl and global climate change on a number of issues. Let's start with observability. The dust storms were very visible and impactful, essentially immediately upon their happening. In climate change, the weather fluctuations we're trying to look for are covered up by current conditions on any given day. So you can't just look at anything casually. You have to establish a lot of measurements of temperature and other environmental factors. You must, it helps if you believe in that global data collection has happened and has happened for decades. It's helpful if you believe in models, skeptically, to make sure that the models take into account the things they should take into account, but those can help you understand the long-term trends and where they're coming from. And then it also helps if you understand the science behind global warming theories. What's going on with the photons, visible and infrared, and what's going on with carbon dioxide molecules and their collisions with infrared photons that are coming off the Earth. The primary affected party for the Dust Bowl was the farmers themselves. In climate change, the primary affected parties are scattered and more specific in certain cases. Polar residents are feeling the increase in temperatures more than residents closer to the equator. It's kind of a strange effect of global warming, but that's the way it works out. Those living near sea level are seeing feeling the effects of sea level rise. The poor are unable to afford air conditioning in a lot of hot countries, and the more the average temperature goes up, the more that they will be affected. Heat actually kills people. So if you keep close track of that, you can already see the effects of global warming on that. Farmers depend on stable weather, and so they know what to plant. And global warming is changing the stability of weather. Residents where extreme weather strikes, hurricanes, tornadoes, intense rainfalls, they're all experiencing the effects of global climate change. It's increasing what would otherwise occur. And it's these effects from extreme weather are so strong that it's affecting the insurance market. People in California are having trouble buying insurance because of wildfires, other states' wildfires, other states' hurricanes, other states' rainfall. You name it. It's getting harder to find a place that isn't affected by global climate change. Now let's look at the secondary affected parties. For the Dust Bowl, that was everyone in central and eastern United States where the storms struck. For climate change, everyone on the planet is affected who cannot afford fixes, adaptations, or relocation. Let's look at the fixes or things that need to be changed to struggle with the issue that are caused. In the Dust Bowl, tree planting, soil conservation practices had to be implemented. In climate change, we had to convert all power sources to zero carbon. I mean, some were already zero carbon, but now they all have to be converted to that. Building construction has to be changed. Vehicle power sources need to be changed. Many power sources need to be changed, and all objects that require power for manufacture have to be changed. So the word that comes to mind under climate change is all the things that are needed are ubiquitous. Let's take a look at how political positions and issues affected the response to the crisis. In the Dust Bowl, the New Deal was somewhat controversial, but because it aligned with certain economic supports that were needed in the depth of the Depression, its popularity zoomed. Climate change is either unknown to a wide range of the population, or for certain people that are affluent and are connected to coal and petroleum, they seem to want to doubt global climate change. They also are not members of the most affected parties, and yet they seem to be making policy at this time. Thank you so much for watching this vlog about an old environmental problem, the Dust Bowl, and its relation to the present day environmental problem, climate change. One of the main things I hope you realized by watching this vlog is that we can deal with environmental problems. We did it with the Dust Bowl, and we can do it again with climate change. One major change with climate change is that it's a gradually increasing effect that gradually impacts more and more people. It starts with marginal or small segments of the world's population, but in the end, it could affect practically everyone. So please keep that in mind when you're making decisions and taking actions, that we need to respond to this crisis now in order to reduce the effects on our children and grandchildren. Thank you.